The story begins with several carriages stop and some soldiers starting to prepare for a battle. An army of beings resembling goblins with improvised weapons rushes towards the carriages to loot them. However, all the mercenaries there stand in defense to fight against the monsters. And then the two groups charge at each other, with the only thing remaining being a sea of blood from all the beings involved in the fight. A bearded nobleman, watching the battle while smoking a cigar, complains because these attacks were happening day after day. Distracted, the poor fat man does not notice that some beings were gathering behind him to attack. When the man realizes it, he can no longer react, but for his salvation, a person with long hair charges at the beings to counterattack. The goblin tries to hit the long-haired man, but is immediately cut in half without even seeing it. With a sword in one hand and a shield in the other, the man defends against another monster's attack. He uses his shield to counterattack, hitting the goblin's head and throwing it far away. But despite this, there is still an enraged goblin charging at our protagonist, aiming to kill him and avenge his companions. The irritated man stops using his shield as defense, leaving his hands free, and immediately grabs the poor goblin's skull. With one hand holding the monster's skull and the other holding its arm, he exerts force to tear it apart. And then, in an extremely cruel manner, the man begins to rip the beast in half, while the nobleman from before merely watches. In shock, the nobleman is incredulous that the man had torn a goblin in half with just his bare hands. With his face stained with the creature's blood, the boy continues to stare at the beast's body while the nobleman asks who he was. But before all this happens, we see a man working on a computer, and our protagonist begins to explain that since he was young, he always liked games and that it was not a sin. The world of games had various elements like the case system and poverty, where the nobility reigned, betrayals and murders of close people or even strangers, and last but not least, numerous monsters and ferocious beasts that only think of destroying and killing. Our protagonist introduces himself as Dallin, and his appearance is of a tall man with long hair dressed in medieval clothes. However, he reformulates and says that his real name was something else while he remembers his life in his former world. But before stating his real name, the scene cuts, and we see the boy writing in a book with a quill already in another place. He was in a carriage while the sun shone on his face, and the boy continued writing something in his notebook. A bald and bearded man arrives and says it was time to change shifts, notifying Dallin. Dallin puts away his notebook, then asks if something had happened, and the man replies that no, everything was very quiet as not even a single goblin had appeared. They continue talking about the weather and why the creatures were no longer appearing while Dallin starts getting ready. However, the horse-drawn carriage passes over a stone, causing the bald man who was drinking to spit out his drink. Dallin finishes preparing and wishes his friend a good rest, then leaves. The man wipes the liquid he had spit out and the one in his mouth, only wishing Dallin good work. As the boy leaves the carriage, he is greeted with good morning by several people around. We see that the carriages from before are arriving at a huge city, and Dallin begins to explain that 2 years ago, he started the tutorial of this game. He informs that the starting point of this game is known as the Bastion of Humanity and was called the Labyrinth City Pasion. Looking at the huge castle and all the structures, the boy says that it was on a completely different level from what he saw through his computer screen. Walking towards the gates, the boy adds that it was a huge city with many people and also the only safe way to go to the underground labyrinth. Dallin says there is no other path but this one that allows avoiding the monsters appearing in the labyrinth, which holds numerous treasures buried inside. Concluding that, moreover, at the lowest part of the labyrinth, there is an object called the Stone of Wish that grants a wish. He thinks that honestly this was probably the only way to return to his land, and to confirm if the stone really existed, he would need to descend to the end of the labyrinth. However, catching his attention, an unknown person calls him by his name from behind. The said person was the same noble from last time, who, upon being greeted by Dallin, said the boy didn't need to be so formal. As Dallin approached, it was noticeable that our protagonist was much taller than the man, and Bolkma mentioned that they were companions and thus didn't need formality. Our protagonist assumed that the man wanted something, and the noble was surprised, saying Dallin had a keen perception, which was why he liked the boy. With all this elegance, Bolkma said he had something to offer and asked if Dallin would be willing to join his emporium as his personal mercenary. Hearing this, Dallin was somewhat confused because he thought he had never seen such an event in that game before. Bolkma said his merchant instincts told him that although there were numerous superhumans who flew and crawled in this labyrinth city, he was sure that our protagonist would soon be on the same level as them. The boy asked if the noble was trying to hire him before that happened, and the dwarf confirmed. He emphasized that this would also be advantageous for our protagonist, asking once more if the boy would accept the offer. However, unexpectedly the boy refused, and then the dwarf began to pull something from his jacket, saying he knew this would happen. The man took out a bag of coins, saying it was the commission fee, 15 shillings. Dallin was confused, noting that his commission fee was 10 shillings, and he even thought he would receive less since he joined halfway, but Bolkma said the rest was an investment. Bolkma concluded by saying he wanted to solidify his relationship with a talented warrior, and our protagonist smiled, hearing the man. To finalize the negotiation, the dwarf asked the boy not to ignore him in the future, and he accepted, saying it sounded good. The boy extended his hand to greet and say goodbye, saying he would see Dallin later. Dallin extended his hand, returning the gesture to the noble and smiling at him, realizing that the man truly seemed like a good person, and the conversation ended with a handshake. Later that day, when it was about to get dark and the sun was setting, we see several people walking through the streets of the labyrinth city. Our protagonist was one of them, and the boy seemed confused, immersed in his thoughts, ignoring everyone around him. He recalled the offer the noble had made, thinking that during his gameplay he had never seen anything like it. The boy thought he had never seen such an event before, which meant that the game's events could change depending on his actions. Dallin concluded that it was a very tempting offer, but as soon as he arrived there, he already had something to do because it was all predetermined. The boy continued walking through various streets, alleys, and suburbs of the city. Our protagonist even passed through poorer areas and finally arrived at a place with a sign. The boy looked at the establishment and confidently said he had come to the right place, then walked to the door. Dallin opened it, and upon entering, we see it was a bar with many people talking and drinking. Some mercenaries were discussing their missions and laughing while celebrating. Others were stressed about something, taking out all their anger and hatred on the drink and alcohol, and some were already drunk, sleeping. Looking at the whole situation, surprisingly, Dallin was happy, saying this was definitely the place he desired. Walking and looking around, he began to explain that a little after the start of the game, but something caught his attention, and looking to the side, the boy saw something shiny that surprised him. Our protagonist opened a malicious smile, showing some sharp teeth upon seeing what he had seen. Looking at the bright light, he saw it was a kind of ghostly corpse that was translucent. The system screen appeared, saying the boy had discovered the pathetic soldier's corpse, and we see that the person had been killed there by dagger attacks. The system informed that if the boy collected the body, he could inherit the abilities as well as the skills and items of the dead person. Smiling and staring at it, our protagonist began to think, wondering what the best weapon to deal with that ridiculously difficult game would be. He extended his hand, and all the green energy began to flow into his arm, and the boy collected the corpse, saying he would reach the end of this game no matter what. We see our protagonist using the computer, saying he liked challenging games. While adjusting his peripherals, the boy mentions he enjoyed the controllability commonly referred to as physics, and for that reason, he got bored with very easy games. However, this game was difficult even for him as he stared at his monitor and watched his character get shredded by a huge ogre. Looking at the game over screen, he adds that the main character was weak, and besides that, the monsters were extremely strong. The world inside the game was heading towards ruin. Every allied NPC was either seduced by demons or busy trying to stab him in the back. Drinking energy drinks to stay awake day after day, he says he died about 100 times but was determined to see the end of this game one way or another. Then a system notification appears asking if the player would like to buy the selected items, giving the option of yes or no. Seeing this, our protagonist gets annoyed but says he would spend that money while wondering what kind of cursed game charges to reach the end. Then moving his mouse to the yes button and clicking, he adds that he would have uninstalled it if not for the amount of time he had invested in the game. But in his current life, the boy bangs a mug of meat against the table while sighing, saying he should have just uninstalled that game. Looking to the side, the boy stares at the translucent corpse on the floor while other people continue drinking in the bar. Still staring at the figure, the boy says that luckily he was sure other people couldn't see it. That was called downloaded content or hair, a feature where a new character could inherit the abilities of the main character who died in the last round. And for players who died hundreds of times, this opened up the possibility of infinite growth. Leaving some coins on the counter to pay for the drink he had consumed, the boy gets up saying there was just one flaw in that system. It was that you had to personally go to the place where a body died and collect the corpse yourself. As he stands up and faces the corpse, still hesitant and somewhat incredulous about everything that was suddenly happening in his life, the boy extends his hand. He uses the ability to collect the corpse, and then all the green aura that was around begins to move towards Dallin. Dallin starts being surrounded by all the green aura while observing all that happening to him. Absorbing the aura that surrounded him, his strength, proficiency, and everything he was entitled to begin to increase. However, something he didn't expect appears, and the boy gets a little confused looking in one direction. The system notifies him that he had discovered a skill called Dehaemon's Armed Combat and then informs what that skill did. Looking at his hand that had a purple energy ball, the boy closes it using this skill and wonders how that character had this ability. But ignoring this fact, the boy smiles, saying it was all great while thinking about the possibilities that would give him. The man says his business there was over and so he would leave, but person sitting at one of the tables turns their attention to Dallin. Next to his henchman, the crime boss says he had never seen Dallin's face and that the boy seemed like a mercenary, so he asks what brought the boy there. The man asks Dallin if he knew the business ethics of that place, and the boy asks what he was talking about. Still a little drunk, the bandit says that the business ethics were a money fee that Dallin should transfer to him and Maroon, the manager of that inn. Maroon continues saying that as long as the man was there, he could eat and drink safely, and hearing that, Dallin interprets it as a threat. Our protagonist, hearing what the mercenary was saying, looks at a dagger in the same pocket and recognizes it. Remembering the corpse he had just absorbed, the boy recalls that this was the bastard who had killed him before. However, to the bandit's misfortune, Dallin says that unfortunately he had no money to give, and the man gets irritated asking if the boy really had nothing. Maroon imposingly goes up close to our protagonist, staring at him with a murderous aura. His henchman next to him, a muscular bald man, tries to go after the man, but Maroon stops him saying that it was alright and he would let Dallin go. The bandit questions Dallin if the boy had paid for the alcohol, and the boy confirms. Trying to act the good guy, the boy says the boy should go his way and he would make an exception and let the boy go. Dallin calmly turns to open the door, not noticing that behind him, Maroon has an extremely psychotic aura. The bandit begins to draw his dagger and with a threatening aura charges at our protagonist. The boy seemed unaware of what was coming, only looking ahead as he was about to open the door. However, turning with an even more frightening aura, Dallin says he already knew about it and counterattacks the man. Outside the bar, people are going about their lives normally as they walk the streets that night. When everyone least expects it, the bar door opens and Maroon comes flying out from our protagonist's strike, ripping the door off and being thrown far away. The bandit, upon being thrown, hits his head and back against the wall on the other side of the street, falling to the ground and becoming dazed. Dallin, while cracking his neck, says he wouldn't fall for that failed tactic twice and curses the bandit. Still somewhat dazed and irritated, Maroon orders all the bandits inside the establishment to attack, and thus several armed people surround Dallin. The bandits, seeing the size of our protagonist, question whether he was really a normal person and if he had come from somewhere up north. The boy feels somewhat embarrassed, just scratching his face and looking around at all his pursuers. However, showing a darker side, the boy smiles, thinking there was a new skill and that this was a great time to test it. Without any fear, the boy drops his sword and shield on the ground, cracking his knuckles and intending to fight with bare fists. In a haughty and mocking manner, he makes a signal indicating that all the bandits could attack him, provoking them. Seeing the man's attitude, everyone charges at the boy, stating he was arrogant, and then advances against him. One of the bandits wielding a small blade leaps at our protagonist, saying the boy should die. But Dallin was merely concentrating a purple aura in his hand, waiting for the bandit to come into the lion's den. Then, when the man was about to hit him, he opens his fist one last time, closing it immediately afterward and striking the bandit's stomach. With the strong impact, the man is instantly repelled, being thrown meters away, already unconscious and probably dead. Seeing that, the other bandits, even finding it frightening, immediately charge at Dallin, and two of them have two blades ready to kill the boy. A bald man tries to attack with a sword, but the boy quickly dodges and then counterattacks, throwing the man away. The other bandit manages to land his attack with a wooden club, but realizes the club broke without leaving a scratch on his opponent. The bandana-wearing man, seeing it had no effect, wonders how a human's body could be as hard as iron while becoming worried. Dallin takes advantage of this distraction and also strikes the man with the back of his fist in the belly, knocking him out immediately. Seeing the bandits charging at him, our protagonist does only one thing. He smiles wickedly because he knew he could win. Maroon, who was completely beaten on the other side of the street, gets irritated, saying he pays the bandits to obey, so they should finish that guy immediately. Even hesitating upon hearing their boss's order, a blonde man immediately attacks Dallin from behind, trying to stab the boy with a blade. However, before he could see it, Dallin immediately spins his body, hitting his opponent's chin squarely with his heel. And while his partner fell to the ground, another bandit charges to attack the boy with a dagger. However, this time Dallin manages to defend himself just in time, creating a dust cloud that makes it impossible to see anything for a few seconds. When the dust settles, we can see that Dallin managed to catch the man's dagger with his own hands, injuring his fist in the process. Immediately, while preventing his attacker's movement, the boy retorts with a full punch to the guy's face, who wondered how he had caught the dagger with his hand. Upon receiving the impact of the blow, the man also goes rolling backward, meters away, already unconscious. Dallin seems unhappy, complaining that it was crap, also wiping the dust off his chest. Looking at the bodies of the defeated bandits around him, he explains he was only trying to grab the man's wrist. That must have happened because the skill proficiency was low. Seeing his stats, Dallin realizes his skill Dehaemon's armed combat had only increased by 1% proficiency, saying the game was damn hard. Looking back, a bald person appears, asking the boy what he had done, catching his attention. The bartender accuses Dallin, stating that the boy was beating people up in broad daylight, and that even if he was a mercenary, it was not allowed. However, our protagonist had no patience for conversation, and thinking that the man was threatening him at this point, the boy draws an axe. The bartender continues complaining, saying that if the guards found out about this, he wouldn't get away unscathed, and before he could realize it, an axe flies in his direction. The bald man only manages to see the object hitting near his head, becoming completely terrified. Our protagonist then apologizes, saying that it had slipped from his hand by accident. He walks up to the bald man, removing the axe that had gotten stuck in the wood, and the boy remains nervous. With a murderous aura and the axe in his hands, he asks the bartender what the man was saying. At night, near a cabin, we see Dallin tossing a bag of gold into the air. The boy says that before threatening someone, you should know who your enemy is, and since the guy was the innkeeper, he had made a lot of money. As he walks through the city streets, he adds that with this he could stay in a good place without worrying about anything. Already in a few meters away, the receptionist welcomes our protagonist, saying that this was the Sword and Shield Inn. The man asks the boy how long he plans to stay because this inn even offers discounts depending on his mercenary rank. Dallin then says he would stay for a week and pulls out his silver necklace from his pocket, informing that he was a silver rank mercenary. The receptionist explains that since he was silver rank, breakfast and lunch would be completely free, but dinner would be extra, and the price of the bowl was 7 shillings. Looking at the bag of coins, the boy feels somewhat disappointed, thinking that it was still expensive. However, with few options, he leaves the coins on the counter and then heads to his room, number 412. Upon arriving there, the boy removes all of his armor and weapons, placing them on his bed. The boy goes to the window to look at the moon in the sky and says that this was the true beginning because the most important thing before completing the game was survival. Dallin continues immersed in his thoughts, thinking that to prevent this world from collapsing, he would have to become stronger, and for that, he would need money and experience. But unfortunately, with his current equipment and skills, that would be practically impossible. He needed money to buy good equipment and had to level up to use the hair skill. Thanks to his countless rounds, the corpses of his characters are scattered throughout the entire continent, and this would allow him to evolve exponentially. Clenching his fists, determined with his desire, the boy concludes that if he collected all the corpses, he could become extremely stronger than before. While imagining the creatures in that world, he notes that time was short, and he would have to prepare as quickly as possible. Thinking more deeply, the boy tries to find a special mission where he can earn money and collect corpses, simultaneously exploring the country. The boy finishes by saying that for this, he would have to meet the owner of the nest the next day. In another place, you can see the establishment with a logo of a raven. Inside this place, everything is illuminated by a purple light, while on a table there are various equipment, books, and magical potions. A beautiful girl rests part of her face on her hand while she says the name Dallin. Reading some papers, we see that the girl was sitting in a chair near a table, reading a specific paper with information about our protagonist. The next day, the sun finally rises, shining on the whole hotel and other apartments in the Labyrinth City. The man in charge of the hotel reception wishes our protagonist a safe journey, and the boy quickly leaves the place. Looking around and still a bit confused, the boy asks himself if he should go now or wait for a more appropriate moment. He starts walking through the streets and suburbs of the city, heading to the location he wanted to visit. After some walking, he finally sees the Raven logo and says it looks like he has arrived. Looking at the establishment, everything was completely run down, even overtaken by vines that were growing, and Dallin remarks that it was very neglected. Entering without asking anyone, the boy asks if there was anyone there, and it's possible to see that it looked like a bar illuminated by a purple magic crystal. Searching the establishment, Dallin notes that the door was open, but the owner of the nest didn't seem to be there. Something catches his attention, and he diverts his gaze to a door, saying it might be an uninvited guest. Behind the door, the same girl from the previous day was hiding the crossbow, and when the boy notices this, he says he has to clear up the misunderstanding. The boy goes to the door he entered and knocks with a secret code that only he and a few specific people knew. Hearing this, the girl remains silent for a while, then sighs and realizes what it is. Before opening the door, she asks how many times she has to say it, and as she opens the door, she says that outside business hours, one should only come if it's urgent. Upon seeing our protagonist, she notices that the boy is much taller than her and comments that she has never seen him before. Sighing, the boy says that the girl needs to expand her customer base to do well in business, as this place should be thriving, and the girl remains silent. Smiling the hint of mockery, she explains that she is quite capable and that the boy talks a lot for a customer from the north. She rephrases and asks how a savage dares to hint at someone like her, then asks if the boy understands, and Dallin confirms. The boy says it wouldn't be good if he were just a savage who migrated at the age of 2, and the girl is a bit confused by the phrase. He explains that he was civilized from an early age, and unlike an informant, she wasn't very good at foreign languages. Hearing this, the girl laughs despite trying to hold it back, saying the boy is a disappointment. The girl apologizes, commenting that she didn't expect to be fooled in such a gentlemanly manner. She turns around, smiling, and walks back to where she was, saying that since our protagonist is a customer, he will be served tea. As she turns, our protagonist notices the girl holding a crossbow and feels a bit nervous, sweating. He thinks that his chest was almost pierced, and with a knowing smile, the girl simply ignores him. Inside, the girl serves tea to Dallin, saying that even if he has heard about her, they should introduce themselves. She introduces herself as Sienna, stating that she works as a simple informant for the Raven's Nest, but is actually the owner of the place. The boy introduces himself as Dallin, saying he heard that he could accept various types of missions there. As she sits across from him, the girl confirms that he can take missions if he wants, but asks how the boy discovered that place. The boy replies that it was Bulkma who told him, and he also said that if she offers alcohol, he could drink, but if she offers tea, not to drink it. Irritated, the girl says that the man's tongue is too loose and asks if our protagonist saved his life, to which the boy says it was something like that. She explains that the code the boy used to knock on the door is something only truly close people know, so she tried to take precautions. The boy says that collateral damage is too great for a simple concern, but changing the subject, the girl asks if he wants a mission. She explains that even with everything, she still doesn't know the boy, whether close to Bulkma or not, so this is the first time they're meeting. And for now, the only thing the girl can do is give trivial missions, things that wouldn't have much impact on her business even if the boy fails. Smiling, the boy says it's okay since this is their first meeting, and the girl also smiles. Smiling, the girl says she should witness the abilities of the almighty warrior who tore apart a goblin with his bare hands. In another place, in a more remote part of the city resembling a slum, Dallin is seen reading some information on a flyer he received. He says that the girl is like a fox and that "I don't know you yet" talk was all lies. From the moment he arrived in the city, the girl already had information on who he was before he even thought of going there. After some walking, the boy steps into a part of the city's sewer and notices something. That was the lower street in the Bronze Territory's outskirts, and realizing he was in the right place, the boy starts to analyze. It seems there was an incident of missing people on that street, and that's why he received the mission to go there. Apparently, several disappearance cases have been occurring over an entire month in the same place, the entrance to Low Street. The boy begins to enter and search the area, while it is also explained that these incidents happen every 3 to 5 days. Recently, however, a young man disappeared, so the criminal seems to be getting bolder. Our protagonist then enters the sewer. Looking around, Dallin comments that it was written that the last disappearance happened there, and so the boy begins to investigate. Something catches his attention, and looking ahead, he sees the shadow of a monster talking about its stomach. The creature resembled a human but was walking on all fours and acting like an animal. Dallin then draws his shield and sword, preparing for combat, but something catches his attention when he sees the monster. He realizes that this humanoid creature, which resembled a rat, was the bastard that had devoured one of his bodies. The system notifies that Dallin had discovered the body of the hunter who was devoured as a form of test. The system also hints that our protagonist could inherit the bodies that were eaten or absorbed by someone by defeating the target that consumed it. Dallin faces the beast and notices that the monster has various veins on its back and a monstrous appearance. Seeing this, the boy smiles, saying he wouldn't have imagined finding his target so quickly. The boy assumes he's lucky, and the notification explains that if he defeats the target and absorbs it, he will acquire the powers of the corpse the monster ate. Raising his shield to defend himself, the boy comments that the monster is either a low-level half-monster or a low-level boss. Recalling his first battle against the beast, he notes that the rat originally had the size of an ogre and could easily destroy buildings. The creature, in a frightening and terrifying manner, says it didn't have much to eat today and was hungry since the small meals no longer affected its stomach. Taking a battle stance, Dallin comments that since it's the beginning of the game, it seems this creature is still developing and unfinished. Realizing this, our protagonist says it's better this way since he wouldn't face the monster at its full strength, making things easier. With a wicked smile, Dallin says he can cut the monster down before it reaches its strongest level. Irritated and already without human consciousness, the beast, with furious eyes and teeth, charges our protagonist and his life. It runs towards Dallin with its sharp and gigantic claws, ready to tear him apart, trying to attack the boy. However, Dallin is already prepared and easily dodges the attack by stepping back. He takes advantage of the stop to quickly strike his opponent with a kick to the stomach. The beast is thrown meters away by the attack, causing extreme damage to its belly. The monster hits its head against a sewer wall, becoming extremely injured and dazed. The creature turns to look at Dallin, and we see that the wound had crushed part of the beast's skull. However, a disgusting pink slime begins to form on the wound, regenerating it immediately. Seeing that his enemy had regenerated, the boy becomes extremely irritated, realizing the monster was still very strong. Quickly and without hesitation, the monster turns, ready to attack again, charging at our protagonist to kill him. However, without mercy, the boy uses his sword to try to cut the monster in half, but only manages to leave a wound in its stomach. The furious beast screams in pain while our protagonist realizes his attack hadn't been deep enough. Still groaning in pain, the half-human monster contorts, trying to hold the blood pouring from its stomach. Seeing his enemy kneeling before him, the boy raises his sword to finish him off and end the fight. Unexpectedly, with tears in its eyes, the monster begs our protagonist to stop because it was a person. Hearing this, the boy is completely confused, asking if the monster is okay now, and the person responds affirmatively. Crying, the beast says it didn't do it because it wanted to, while sobbing with tears streaming from its eye. He continues crying in despair, saying he didn't want to eat people and that a certain type of people put this beast inside him. Our protagonist asks who these people are. The monster responds that he doesn't know either and that they wore black robes and masks. The monster adds that these people used some strange potions and spells to transform him into this, and Dallin asks what the masks look like. Still crying over everything that happened, the beast explains that they were made of gold with a smooth surface and a large painted mouth. Hearing this, Dallin remembers something and says that as time passes, these people will give him more headaches. That's why he better be prepared to face them, and suddenly the monster starts to despair, asking how he could do this to people. The boy responds that it wasn't his fault, leaving the monster surprised and somewhat distressed. He adds that the people who turned the boy into that are the main culprits, so he doesn't need to worry. Dallin further states that he will make them all disappear, and for some reason, the monster starts to writhe. As he stands up, our protagonist thanks and sheaths his sword, thanking the monster once more. Still in tears and crying, the man says that those people fed him the flesh of his own daughter. And as the boy walks away, the monster continues talking about how they forced him to eat open-mouthed, consuming flesh, muscles, and intestines. But something changes in him, and his aura reverts to what it was, making him extremely aggressive and frightening, saying he is hungry. The beast lapses back into madness, and then tries to attack Dallin again, charging at the boy while his back is turned. Realizing what had happened, the boy bites his lips, becoming extremely irritated, and draws his sword. Before the monster could reach him, as an act of saving it from this suffering, the boy turns and uses his sword to finish it off. The beast's head instantly flies meters away while the half-human body falls into the sewer water. The system notifies that the boy had eliminated the monster that had swallowed his corpse, and thus he had discovered a new body. Dallin observes his former corpse and the monster's body lying in the water, cursing the world while the system asks if he wants to absorb it. We return to the raven's nest when it was already late afternoon and the sun was starting to set. Inside, we see the beautiful girl asking our protagonist if he had returned to the inn. The boy enters the place with an irritated and downcast expression, so the girl asks if he wants a drink. Without much conversation, Dallin throws a bag that was in his hands on the table, stating that he had captured the man they were looking for. The woman opens the bag and, seeing what was inside, has a disgusted look but says nothing. Seeing this, she realizes that tearing a goblin apart wasn't a lie and says she now has no doubt that Bulpa's words were serious after all. Santa takes a bag of coins from behind the counter and says that anyway, he did a good job and thus pays the 15 shillings. With a somewhat embarrassed face, the girl says the boy completed the job faster than she expected, but that doesn't mean he'll get more. Still saddened by the situation he saw, the boy says that amount was more than enough for a single trip. He also pulls out another bag from his pockets and places it on the counter, leaving Sienna intrigued and questioning what it was. With a cold expression, he explains that what's in the bag are the belongings of the murdered victims, leaving the girl confused and somewhat scared. Looking at it, the girl questions what she should do since he was handing it to her, and Dallin explains that he wanted her to give it to their families. Dallin offers to pay, but the girl says she is not an informant who extorts money using some excuse, and the boy could keep the money she would make. Smiling more relieved as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders for the girl's kind act, Dallin thanks Sienna. He turns and begins to leave, saying he will see her tomorrow, and the girl, irritated, responds that for the 10th time, he should come during business hours. Dallin retorts that he would think about it if she offered him a drink instead of tea to try to kill him. Proud and somewhat happy, she sighs while watching the boy leave, realizing he had a good heart. Watching all this, she asks if it was really serious since this wasn't the action of a typical mercenary who only cares about himself. Santa also says that he doesn't seem like a man who would simply be driven by a sense of justice and be stupid, getting a bit interested while looking at the bag. The girl sighs once more, saying that he's a very interesting mercenary. She says she is sure Dallin is capable of everything she commands, and already at night, we return to the inn where our protagonist was. At the inn, the boy is writing something again in his notebook. We discover that it was Dallin's diary, and he was reporting that he eliminated a demi-demon that would later become a disaster and even recovered a corpse. He activates his stats window, beginning to analyze it, seeing that he had already gained a new skill called night vision. Noticing that his stats had increased exponentially, the boy says that, as he thought, he should recover as many corpses as possible as quickly as possible. This is the cost if he wants to repair the future world scenario that is approaching. There are various situations that will happen soon, such as a coven of witches who will burn a city and kill many citizens. There's also the mystery of the cultists who are trying to do something and are hiding while conducting experiments and manipulating people. An army of vampires is invading the Empire, wanting to bring it to ruin and destroy it completely. And finally, the evil god, the worst being that exists, and the enemy of everything in that world. He remembers the monster talking about the masks of the people who did that to him. Dallin closes his diary with a bang, extremely irritated with the situation, standing up and saying he will do what he can for now. The secret cult society of Palacin, if left alone, will eventually become a presence that cannot be ignored. But before that happens, he opens a wicked smile and adds that he will dismantle them member by member and defeat them. The next morning, we see the Raven's Tavern, where our protagonist picks up his missions. Inside, a bartender is cleaning some glass cups when something behind him catches his attention. Dallin arrives and sits on a small chair in front of the counter, asking the bartender for a glass of whiskey. The man quickly nods and rings a bell near him, then hands our protagonist the drink, which he quickly consumes. However, surprising the boy, Sienna appears, asking how long he will ignore the instructions to come only during business hours. Dallin responds that if there's a customer and a bartender, it's business hours, and the girl says the boy is talking too much. Our protagonist Picking it up, he realizes it's a necklace, and Penny, seeing it, responds that it's a single-use defense spell necklace given to Tower disciples, and Dalen already knew that. Observing more closely, he notes that the crystal is no longer lit, meaning the spells stored inside are exhausted. In other words, this was the mage's final destination as they observe the nearby structure. Looking at a certain object, the boy becomes somewhat reflective and hesitant, thinking about what to do next. Stating an entrance, he calls Penny, and when the girl responds, he asks if she is good at fighting. Dalen stares at a specific place, stands up, and draws his sword. Penny replies that she is good enough to defend herself, and Dalen responds that's sufficient. Our protagonist prepares for a bloody battle about to begin, wielding his shield and sword. In the same hand holding his shield, the boy also holds a torch and positions himself in front of Penny. He asks the girl to stay behind him for a moment, then some beings begin to emerge from the entrance our protagonist was watching. Several monsters resembling humanoid frogs walking on two legs appear with their grotesque appearance. With their tongues out, the monsters drool as if eyeing two prey, ready to devour them. Seeing this, Dalen calls the creatures frogmen, noting that even though they are lower-level monsters, they have high intelligence, making them difficult to combat. Looking back, Dalen sees Penny wielding a knife in a combat stance and nodding, realizes he has nothing to worry about. However, immediately some frogs charge at our protagonist, aiming to kill him once and for all and accomplish their goal. In reaction, right after seeing this, Dalen positions his sword for an attack. As soon as one of the monsters gets close to him and is about to attack, the boy swiftly cuts it in two before the monster can react. The other two creatures, which were behind the fallen beast, also move to attack, intending to use the moment when Dalen is distracted. However, with extreme ease and coldness in his eyes, the boy also cuts the two creatures in half, killing them instantly. Penny, however, is startled, making a face and staring at something in front of her, asking Dalen to look immediately. As Dalen pays attention ahead, he notices that one of the creatures is starting to come with a certain tool to attack. Not only that, but an army of frogmen is coming from the entrance, ready to kill Dalen and end his life. While wiping his face from the blood of one of the beasts, the boy starts to laugh, saying that maybe it's not an army, but a company there. Smiling wickedly, ready for battle, our protagonist adds that none of that matters. Preparing for battle again, this time he charges at the monsters, saying that nothing will matter after he kills all the beasts. After a while of a bloody battle, we see Penny holding her blood-stained knife, surprised by something. The girl can't even speak what she saw, and when we look around, a pile of frogmen corpses is scattered throughout the sewer. Dalen, his body completely stained with blood, asks if Penny is okay, and the girl replies that she is, thanks to our protagonist. As she approaches Dalen, the girl says she has been part of the cleaning crew for 3 years, so she can handle 2 frogmen. Suddenly, the boy asks the girl not to come closer, leaving her confused while he positions himself in front of her. Suddenly, a sword comes toward our protagonist, who barely manages to defend himself. He then throws his tool aside to draw his axe, intending to throw it. In a dark passage where nothing can be seen, the boy throws his axe, which spins towards something. It seems to hit one of the frogmen, making a monstrous noise suddenly. Penny, scared, asks how our protagonist knew there was a beast there, and he explains that monsters become more ferocious when hunting humans. Actually, the man was using his night vision ability, allowing him to see in the dark, and he notices that only 2 remain, with the last one fleeing. Penny asks what they should do, and Dalen explains that they will chase the monster since its lair is probably not far away. The woman, staring at our protagonist, feels somewhat embarrassed, saying he is extremely incredible. Dalen, noticing the girl had stopped walking, nudges her, asking what she's doing since they should go immediately, and the girl agrees. After a long walk, they reach a hidden room with a throne. Penny, still a bit scared by the situation, leans a little on Dalen and nudges the boy, pointing out that someone is sitting on the throne they are seeing. On the throne sits a mage holding a staff imposingly, and Dalen notes that it's the first time he's seen the boy in person. The pagan mage expelled from the magic tower, Derek, sitting on his throne, asks who our protagonist is and if he is the one who touched his experimental sample. Dalen thinks that the pagan mage was one of the bosses who gave him an unforgettable death, and the boy confirms to Derek that he was the one who killed the rat man because he was taking a stroll. The mage responds that the boy is lying because it's strange since normal people don't take deep strolls in the sewers as he was doing. The mage strikes his staff on the ground, making a loud noise while saying that our protagonist should not have pursued the frogs that fled to his lair. Then, from the surrounding waters, several frogmen begin to emerge. Penny, seeing this, starts trembling all over, holding her knife and looking ahead with a terrified expression. Looking around, she sees an army of various frogmen ready to tear apart and attack anyone. As she steps back, the girl says that if this is released into the city, it will cause a catastrophe, continuing with a terrified expression. However, Dalen touches her back, preventing her from moving further back, catching her attention and making her blush. Looking at Dalen, the man maintains a firm and confident expression as if wanting to reassure the girl. Seeing the protagonist, she understands that the boy can defeat as many frogmen as there are, so she doesn't need to despair. With a look of extreme psychopathy, Derek orders his frogmen to tear them both to pieces. Then, revealing they even had enormous teeth, the frogs charge ferociously to defeat Dallin and Penny. Dallin remains motionless before an army of frogs rushing towards him, ready to kill him. Holding a blood-stained sword, the boy asks Penny to stay behind him while he fights. The boy starts walking towards his opponents, reassuring Penny that he will finish this quickly. With a cold expression, Dallin states that if the conjurer dies, all the frogmen will die as well. Observing hundreds of these creatures coming at him with only a shield and a sword in his hands, he says there is only one answer. Swinging his sword with fluid and rapid movements in one direction and another, the only thing visible is the splatter of the creature's blood. One of the frogmen, about to attack Dallin, only sees his arm being cut off, groaning in pain before he can react. Still with a cold and frightening expression, our protagonist begins to shred several frogs while saying he would kill everyone in the way to get to the summoner. With just one step for momentum, the boy leaps forward, passing and eliminating several frogs without giving them a chance to react. After dashing forward, one of the frogs comes at him, opening its mouth and revealing immense sharp, pointed teeth, ready to devour our protagonist. However, quickly, with a look of disgust at the sight, the boy splits the frog's jaw in two, preventing it from attacking him. As he lands on the ground, several frogs surround the boy from all directions, not allowing him to escape. With just one hand, he prepares himself, clenching his fists, and quickly punches two of the frogs, eliminating them. He notices one of the frogs trying to attack him from behind and swiftly reacts, cutting it in two before the frog can see. The battle continues with several creatures attempting to attack our protagonist from all directions to compensate for their lack of strength and skill. But with all of Dallin's swordsmanship skills, he can easily kill most of them, but his sword breaks in the process. Due to the number of frogs attacking, even his shield falls apart, leaving the boy with bare hands. And then all the frogmen seize this opportunity to attack our protagonist, who intends to fight with his bare hands and kill all those beasts. He uses his Dahaman ability to fight with his hands, furiously stating that he would finish off all those damn frogs. Several beasts continue trying to hit our protagonist, who with only his fists crushes their skulls and stomachs. Throughout the fight, the boy maintains a cold expression, only clenching his fists and staining them with the blood of his victims, showing no mercy. With a single blow to the stomach of one of the frogmen, he can throw it against the other creatures, sending them flying. Derek the wizard, upon seeing this, is terrified, seeing that the boy was very powerful and seemed psychopathic. Seeing his summons being torn apart by a man with bare hands, he wonders where such a monster had come from. Looking ahead, the pagan wizard does not notice Dallin advancing towards him with an axe in his hands, ready to finish him off. When he realizes it is too late and even trying to defend himself with his staff, he fails. A purple trail of energy can be seen moving from top to bottom, following Dallin's motion with the axe. After the dust settles, we see that our protagonist has landed a full blow to the pagan wizard's skull, who still utters his last words. Seeing that he had accomplished his goal, Dallin sighs in relief, realizing that everything was over. A notification appears with the wizard's death, indicating that he had discovered the body of a mercenary who had become a pagan wizard. Our protagonist remembers the moment he fought and was absorbed by Derek, who had dragon blood in his body and was used for experiments. Dallin adds, saying that thinking about it now, that scene was extremely horrific, cursing the corpse lying before him. Then the system asks if he wanted to absorb the body to acquire its skills and stats. Our protagonist then stretches out his hand, opening his fist, and uses corpse gathering to increase his stats. With green energy flowing through his body, all of his stats begin to increase, especially sense energy and mana. He also gains an ability called Dragon Blood Regeneration, which he had obtained in his former body, and he is already at 6% proficiency. Bulge on our protagonist, and the boy starts to feel something flowing through him, causing extreme pain. A golden aura starts to spread across Dallin's body, making him appear covered in a gold-like energy. Everyone in the room, including Penny and the frogmen, are incredulous, not understanding what is happening. For a moment, the boy remains still, feeling all this energy flowing through his body, making him extremely powerful. With confidence, the boy turns, drawing the attention of the frogmen and asking if they are ready for what is about to happen. After showing his new strength, all of frogs stare at our protagonist, trembling with fear. Fearing what would happen, they immediately flee before they can be killed. Seeing this, Dallin sighs a bit, closing his eyes and thinking about something. However, his thought is interrupted by Penny calling his name, and the boy opens his eyes to see the girl. The boy walks up to Penny, saying he told her to stay away, and she runs, asking if Dallin is okay. A bit frightened by everything that happened before her eyes, Penny asks if the boy is really human, and the boy asks what she means. Penny starts to say that even though the boy is human, not everyone is like Dallin, as he killed dozens of frogs with just his hands. Dallin asks what she thinks about something, and the girl doesn't understand the question, asking back why he suddenly asked that. Our protagonist responds that he only asked because he had nothing else to say, and the girl agrees but says she wanted to say something. Embarrassed, touching the tips of her fingers, she says that even though it's the first time they've met, he is different from all the other people she has known. Extremely shy, the girl says that being near him makes her feel he could do anything. She says she doesn't care if Dallin is human or not, as what matters is that the boy is himself. But Dallin interrupts, asking her to wait. With a slightly embarrassed expression, the boy says he wasn't talking about her thoughts. He wanted to know what she thought about where the pagan mage hid the hostages, leaving the girl completely red like a tomato. The girl gets irritated, saying that if he doesn't explain what he's asking, she won't understand. Elsewhere, in a church with an upside-down cross sculpture, we see some people talking. 4 hooded figures are conversing, and one of them says the reason for urgently calling this apostles' meeting is because Derek has died. All the others are shocked, and one of them asks how a powerful pagan mage like him could have been killed. The mage conducting the meeting says that even though he was the last to be admitted, he wasn't the type of person who could be easily killed. One of the masked figures asks what happened to him and the army of 500 frogmen. Unexpectedly, leaving everyone in the room incredulous, the man responds that half the army was killed. He also explains that the rest fled in fear, and that's how Derek died. One of them asks if it was the guards who did this. Other masked figures also ask if it could have been someone linked to the Silent Company, but they also receive a no as an answer. The mage conducting the meeting says it was done by a single person, leaving one of the masked figures in shock. They continue talking, wondering why the bastard Derek kidnapped a direct apprentice of the elder mage, but an apostle enters the room. All the other masked figures their bow, greeting the great apostle responsible for everything. The man wears a mask like all the others with a smile, but unlike the rest, he walks with an elegant and imposing posture, showing his power. He walks to the center, sits on his throne, and says that the reason he called them there was to say not to fear, just a mercenary. The masked woman who was previously worried asks if it was really a mercenary who single-handedly killed an army of monsters. However, the chief apostle tells her to shut up immediately, making the woman scared. The great apostle explains that he has moved up the date of the grand plan because Derek's death doesn't mean their plans will change. One of the apostles, hearing that the grand plan will be put into action, realizes that this means something significant. Then the chief of all says to release the funds to buy ingredients for the secret drug and bring those who can wield weapons. Irritated, he adds that if things don't go well, they should pressure everyone with the power of the economy, since that is the reason they are increasing their power. The man says that nothing has changed and that the order of evil will begin with them, and the day when the 7 walls collapse is not far off. He orders everyone to prepare for the day the 7 walls will fall, while all the other apostles continue listening, bowed before their master. Elsewhere, after a long time, we see a magic tower in Algaias at a bronze branch. Looking at an extremely fancy clock, watching the hours pass, we see Dallin sitting in a comfortable armchair. The boy remembers Sienna saying that the person who had given the mission wanted to see him personally to give him extra compensation. Happy, Dallin continues looking around, saying there's nothing wrong with him receiving an additional reward, and that's why he's there. Bored and with no one calling him yet, the boy opens his status window, making it appear immediately. He begins to read about the skill he had acquired, Dragon Blood Regeneration. Regeneration, one of the many characteristics that come from dragon blood, was applied to humans but consumes a lot of stamina to use. In the sewer, he slept for a day as soon as he returned from the mission, and it seems he doesn't have full dragon blood in his body, only partially. The boy calculates that it would be impossible to use that skill continuously in a fight without exhausting himself completely. Suddenly, a man with red hair and a large beard enters the room, saying he had kept the guest waiting unintentionally. This person was Felver Valentino, the ancient mage of the Magic Tower of Algaias. He apologizes as it has been a while since he was last at the Magic Tower, so he had to catch up. Felver says he will ask for a cup of tea, and asks if Dallin would like some, to which the boy replies yes. The ancient mage says something, but our protagonist immediately ignores it, starting to smell something he hadn't smelled in years. He smells coffee, and upon looking at the cup, he realizes it's really what he was hoping for, becoming completely happy to see it. The boy starts drinking it immediately, loving it, and then the noble elder says that based on the boy's appearance, he didn't expect him to like tea. While drinking, Felver, the elder, comments that if it's okay with the mercenary, he will send a bag of beans to the raven's nest, and the boy agrees, thanking him. The man apologizes for the inconvenience and introduces himself as an elder mage of the Magic Tower of Algaias, as well as a grandmaster of the arts. He's also Tommy's teacher, the person Dallin saved, so the boy recalls the moment he saved the boy, asking Felver if he is well. Felver thanks Dallin and mentions that Tommy is only well because of him. Our protagonist asks if he knew why the pagan mage went down there. The ancient mage explains that the villain coincidentally found his apprentice and followed his tracks. Looking at his reflection, Felver says that his apprentice didn't know that Derek's strategy was to reach him. Again, the great elder thanks him for defeating the army of frogmen alone and says he couldn't believe Dallin was just a silver-rank mercenary. Dallin replies that he shouldn't judge people just by an identification plate, and the mage agrees as everyone has their own story. The man throws a bag full of coins on the table, saying that is the reward, and it contains 100 silver coins equivalent to 1 gold coin. With a confident face, the mage adds that he will also reward him with something extra, picking something up. He places a beautifully crafted bag on the table, saying that is the present. The mage explains that inside it is a regeneration potion, and he thought that since our protagonist is a sword-wielding warrior, it would be useful. But the mage adds that he thinks Dallin won't need it anymore since he has dragon blood inside him, making our protagonist startled. Seeing Dallin's reaction, the mage quickly asks the boy to calm down as he's not there to threaten him but to make an offer. Irritated and almost ready to attack, the boy tries to calm down, asking what the mage's offer is. Felver, with a completely different face and posture, offers our protagonist the chance to choose a different reward. At sunset, after a long conversation, we see Dallin leaving the place. He remembers Felver saying that the boy chose the right thing, so Dallin says that it's probably better than the potion. As he leaves, our protagonist remarks that he never imagined that the mage was so skilled that he could even recognize dragon blood in his body. Our protagonist also recalls the moment he finished fighting the mage and saw his axe shattered. Dallin feels somewhat sad as it was his last tool since his sword and shield were also destroyed. Penny notes that he can't do anything more with those and says Dallin needs to buy new ones, catching the girl's attention. A bit embarrassed, the girl says her uncle is a blacksmith and asks if Dallin wants to visit him because since the boy is special, she will ask her uncle to give him a good discount. In the present moment, the boy sighs, saying that if he's going to get a good discount, he should go there since he has no other option. Far away, we see the Forge Street in the Bronze Territory, with many people walking around. As he walks and looks around, Alan says he thinks the girl gave him that location, but he isn't sure. However, he hears someone shouting for help, and when he looks in that direction, he is confronted with an unbelievable sight. He sees someone being thrown out of the forge Penny had told him about, hands tied behind their back. Inside the forge, a blonde man had thrown the person out after kicking him, saying the old man was screwing everything up. The blacksmith begs them to leave his niece Penny alone and curses the bastards. Seeing the situation, Dallin realizes what's happening and notices that the man is the girl's uncle. The man who was assaulting the blacksmith leaves the forge, saying that the man should never pay the interest on time. The blonde thug says that if the blacksmith doesn't have money, he could use his niece to pay the debt, causing Penny to despair. Trying to get up, a bit hurt from the fall, the blacksmith tells the thug that if he continues saying those things, he will make him pay with his mouth. Our protagonist watches the fight from afar, observing the entire situation and realizing something. The blacksmith Penny mentioned is named Leveron Araquin, a well-known mithril refiner. Our protagonist explains that by the second half of the game, this blacksmith develops exponentially and creates the greatest weapons for humanity. He is a very important NPC blacksmith, necessary for the strategy in the second half of the game. Returning to the present moment, the blonde man draws a sharp knife and says the man could pay with one of his hands. However, someone firmly grasps his wrist and the man gets irritated, asking who is doing that. Our protagonist snatches the sword from the thug's hand, saying that if an old man's hand costs a gold coin, how much would a young man's hand cost? The last thing we hear is the thug's scream echoing through the city, and some time passes. We see a mug of beer on a table, and the blacksmith thanks our protagonist for saving him and his niece. The man says he had heard about the boy because his niece had mentioned him and asked our protagonist, who is drinking, if he needs a new weapon. Unfortunately, the blacksmith explains that he cannot make a suitable weapon for the boy now because, as he saw earlier, he has a debt with the shop. Wiping the drink from the corner of his mouth, the boy asks what the man's debt has to do with making weapons. The blacksmith gets irritated, slamming his hands on the table, saying that people confiscated all of his tools as interest. And with this debt, a shop told him that if he worked for them for 5 years, the debt would be paid off. However, for a neighborhood blacksmith like him, the moment he closed the shop, it would end, and when the debt was paid off, the only future left for him would be to work in someone else's forge. Our protagonist assumes the man tried to maintain his position, and in the end, the thugs came to threaten him. The blacksmith ignores what our protagonist says, only mentioning that he hates those bastards from Telia, which catches the boy's attention. The blacksmith then, with his hand on his face, says that if Dallin came with that purpose, he could forget it. But unexpectedly, he is interrupted, and our protagonist asks how much the man owes, making him incredulous. Confident, Dallin says he will pay the debt for him while smiling happily. The boy begins to leave the place, but the blacksmith tries to stop him, saying the amount is too high for one person to pay alone. As he leaves, Dallin just waves goodbye, saying there is a way for everything in this world, and he doesn't need to worry, but in return, he wants the blacksmith to make some weapons. As he leaves, our protagonist picks up an axe from the forge to complete his mission. Looking back confidently, believing in his abilities, he tells the blacksmith to consider it a deposit. Finally, before leaving, the boy thanks him for the beer, and the only thing the dwarf does is watch the man leave. The blacksmith turns to his niece, asking who that man was, and the girl remains silent. Embarrassed, she says they first need to consider whether he was human or not, but in short, he was an incredible person. At night, elsewhere, we see several carriages with various supplies of food and drinks arriving. Someone speaks to Bulkma, who is carrying a log, asking the boy what he is trying to say. Our protagonist asks Bulkma if he could lend him some money, around a handful of gold coins. The man doesn't even know what to say, only observing the boy in front of him. After a while in a house, we see someone with a bag of coins in their hand, and Dalen says it was a commission. We recall the moment when Dalen was negotiating with Bulkma, explaining that a family member has a debt, and the noble asks what it's about. While eating some grapes in the noble's house, our protagonist explains that it's a business fund debt that kept accumulating until it became several dozen times what it was originally. Again, Dalen asks if the man could lend him the gold or not, and Bulkma is a bit hesitant, questioning whether he should. While smoking, Bulkma asks with whom this person created the debt. Dalen responds that it was with the Tilia shop, and upon hearing this, the dwarf makes an irritated face, clearly displeased. The noble then says he will lend the money, and Dalen, eating an apple, says it seems the man also has connections with Telia. Our protagonist asks what he should do in return, and the noble says he thinks quickly. While extinguishing his cigar, he says that the Telia shop is an organization with dirty funds, so he arranges to meet Dalen tomorrow at the same time. Dalen starts to explain about the Telia shop, an organization illegally created by the Apostles of Retrograde, a group of cultists. They control most of the commercial power in the Bronze Territory, a place that is essentially the life of the cultists. Dalen didn't plan to meet them so soon, but since they got involved, he will have to crush them. Our protagonist says he would confront them now. They are still a legal merchant association, meaning fighting them openly is very risky. First, he needed to get Leveron out of their clutches, and something comes to mind, making the boy a bit shocked. The boy, looking ahead, notices something he doesn't want to see as he looks at Leveron and Penny's forge. Irritated, the boy realizes it's in front of the blacksmith's shop, meaning the Telia bastards have started moving. Quickly, to protect his allies, the boy begins to run towards the forge without stopping. He sees a group of people armed with knives and clubs in front of the forge, ready to kill Penny and her uncle. One of the men tells the old man to follow them obediently, as they're not doing this, just need a few coins. With a hammer in his hand, he says he won't go, cursing all the henchmen and saying he will kill them. The man starts mocking the blacksmith, saying he's very afraid of a hammer, but the truth is he's just taunting him. With an army behind him, the leader of the group of thugs says that even if the old man can defend himself for a moment, he wouldn't be able to fight them all. The old man, no longer in his prime physical condition, starts trembling in fear, knowing he can't face them all. The thug leader then finally gives the order everyone was waiting for to attack the old man and Penny, calling her a bitch in the process. However, before he can react, an axe comes flying towards him. Immediately, the axe goes straight through, cutting off the thug leader's hand, causing him to lift his bleeding fist and scream in pain. Another thug was about to warn that they were under attack, but immediately Dalen appears behind him, grabbing him by the neck and breaking it. The thugs look at the boy attacking, and Dalen says he has finally made up his mind. With one foot on the lifeless body, he says he will consider each hand of everyone there as a silver coin. Since the price for the hands had been set, he proceeded to get a few more. His armed combat skill had been activated. The first face struck by his fist was crushed like a stomped soda can. The next in line received a punch to the stomach to reflect on his conduct. The third one, even armed with a sword, couldn't defend himself. There was nothing those fools could do. Even so, those who hadn't been beaten yet tried to react somehow. But they had no success. Since they were numerous, one of them said not to be afraid because their attacker was unarmed. He heard this with a smile on his face because he didn't need to be armed to handle them. As soon as they arrived at the place, they were shocked by the scene. The street now had a grim decoration with unconscious bodies lying on the ground. A bystander crawled away in fear, saying they had been attacked by a monster. His neck was stepped on, preventing him from crawling further. With his foot so close to the man's head, he finished the job. The two who had arrived wanted to know who had taken down the fools. Without answering the question, he tossed them a sack containing 26 coins. But the man couldn't believe this young man had done all this for him. In response, he said there was nothing to lose by being friends with a blacksmith as long as he made him some weapons as requested. Looking at the ground, he noticed something different about one of the bodies. So he took it in his hands because he knew the young man was pretending to be dead. He knew they hadn't done this just for a few coins and wanted to know what his superiors intended with all this. Even at a disadvantage, the young man said he wouldn't say anything to him. Since he gave the wrong answer, he got slapped back to reality. Without much patience, he told him this was his last chance, and he had better say what the fools said in the shop. He said to take all of them, so his inquisitor wanted to know who. Artisans, merchants, anyone related to the business. Take them or kill them. Now all that remained was to know who gave the order. Before he could answer, the boy's hand twisted in a bizarre way. He was transforming, but he said the order came from the owner of Tilia's shop. His face gave way to a lycanthropic smile. This made him more alert to what would happen next. Before the transformation was complete, he threw the boy to the ground. The longer time passed, the closer he was to fully transforming. Seeing an axe nearby on the ground, he grabbed it. Now that creature was just a body without a head. The blacksmith didn't know what it was, but he heard from the man that it was a half-monster. Apparently, they could now use semi-monster transformations in real life, a faster development than he had expected. As he was leaving, he told them to go inside, lock the doors, and stay there for a few days, but the blacksmith wanted to know where he was going. In his memories, he knew Tilia's shop hid repugnant things. He was headed to Gallius Emporium because he thought they were targeting one of his wealthy clients. Once he was done there, he would return to get his armor and weapons. In a room, a large chandelier lit the space. He thought it must be a coincidence that even Dallin had gone to speak at Tilia's shop. They had always been suspicious, but he had learned that lately, they were buying a lot of goods. It seemed they were preparing for something big, more than just business. That's when he remembered the man asking what he'd like him to do in this situation. But he would leave the details for when he showed up again. Having coffee as the first activity of the morning was certainly wonderful. It didn't take long for him to be startled by someone suddenly entering through the window. It was Dallin, who had arrived in an extravagant manner. He didn't know why Dallin had arrived so suddenly, but he had already ordered the man to duck. Through the window, arrows began flying in, breaking the few remaining intact. Startled, he wanted to know what this meant. Dallin sighed in relief, saying that if he had been a little later, it would have been much worse. He would explain soon, but for now, the man had to hide under his bed. Reacting quickly, he threw the axe he was holding out the window. There was an archer hidden on one of the nearby rooftops. His face now became a place to hold an axe. As he left the room, he ordered the man not to leave until he returned. Dallin was quite happy because he would gain some experience now. The man heard what he said but understood absolutely nothing. He jumped out the window toward the nearest roof. Beside him was the small body of the archer who had tried to hide. In the axe holder was a white mask. He looked around to get a sense of his surroundings. There were several of these men with masks on their faces. They began to appear in numbers on the rooftops. This was their main military force, white and gold masks in motion. This indicated they wouldn't just stand by and do nothing. Preparing for what was to come, he gripped the axe in one hand. There wasn't much time left before their grand plan would be put into action. A projectile flew in his direction. With skill, he used the axe to defend himself. Standing still wouldn't help, so he started to move. Before him were already a few of the fools who looked surprised. They tried to attack him in vain, but what they threw at him only hit the image he left behind. The first axe strike landed perfectly. It didn't take long for him to be close to the next one. This time, the axe brought about a separation of head and body. Now only 3 were left, and another projectile came his way. Once again, the axe was useful as a tool of defense. Someone said he must be the soldier who killed Derek. This man calmly approached him. They stood face to face, but on different rooftops. As soon as the masked man realized it was him, he expressed his desire to taste some of his blood. For the blood of valiant warriors is always a delight. This was a silver mask. He hadn't expected an executive member to be there. This was Stray Leader Hafen, a low-class assassin vampire who used poison and memorization. In the game, it was difficult even to react to his attacks. Still, he was excited to see how things would go now. There was no other option but to face him alone. Confident, he hoped to resolve everything in just a single strike. The vampire waited, smiling for him to approach. Dallin noticed something was wrong. He was now in the middle of a trap. He did his best to defend against the stakes. Now he felt he had been too reckless and should have been a little more patient. Because of his character's body that this guy had consumed, a notification appeared. He had discovered the killer who dismembered bodies under the night sky. Not to mention the recent attack wasn't made by him alone. The vampire had help from the other fools Dallin hadn't dealt with yet. If that was the case, he needed to take care of those guys first. Attacking, the vampire said he was growing impatient because he already wanted Dallin's blood. The henchmen attacked in unison, just like the crossbowmen on the other side. Dallin found himself surrounded on all sides. With exceptional mastery, he disappeared and was already upon some of them. His axe found the first of many targets. There was no time to waste in this situation, and his attack continued. His strikes were precise and lethal. The long-range shooters were no longer breathing, leaving only the others. He then prepared to throw his axe toward them. Without time to react to the speed of the attack, one had already been hit. Preparing to finish them off, he used his combat ability. As quickly as his axe advanced toward them, it had no trouble taking them down. The survivor of this strike called him a monster. Dallin was relieved that only one of them remained now. Without patience, he let his axe sing. However, he noticed an attack coming from behind. He had to defend immediately, using the axe to stop the projectiles. But what he didn't expect was for poison to come out of them. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he tried to move away from the smoke immediately. But he was already poisoned. The vampire said that a simple human couldn't resist a deadly poison. He hadn't used it earlier because of his companions, but now with only one of them alive, it was a reasonable loss. Even so, the vampire was relieved not to face him head-on as he had taken down all the others without difficulty. Knowing this, he needed to make sure to get rid of him completely. Being a vampire, the poison didn't affect him, but he hoped the human wouldn't be able to resist. Amidst the smoke, he approached what he thought was the body of his victim. As he got closer, he realized it wasn't him. That body wore a golden mask. Dallin is already behind him, ready to let the blade of the axe sing. The vampire didn't expect this attack, much less that the human was still alive. Though he was caught by surprise, the first attack didn't hit him. What occupies his thoughts now is how the human resisted the poison. The only possible explanation is that he must not be human. That is certainly a terrifying monster. Before him, the man says his eyes are burning. It reminded him of tear gas when he was a soldier, but the vampire has no idea what that is. Not understanding what he's saying, he began to attack frantically. All he desires now is for this person to die quickly. Dallin sighed, unconcerned about the attack. He didn't care because their attack patterns were always the same, while the dragon's blood regenerated him. Dallin's foot sank into the roof. The vampire couldn't believe that the man was already before him. Worse than that, his throat was now in the palm of that monster's hand. With him immobilized, Dallin asked if the vampire would like to say his last words. He finally asked him how he survived the poison, which is lethal to humans. The vampire shouted loudly that it was impossible. Dallin told him he was talking too loud and crushed his throat. Luckily, it was a low-class vampire. If it had been higher, he would have turned into a bat or shadow and escaped. With that, he found a body that had perished trying to take down the vampire. The system wanted to know if he wanted to collect the body, so the body was collected by him. With that, he inherited the vampire's abilities, plus 3 in strength and jumping skill. Still in the house, the man was terrified because he never imagined he would be the target of an assassination. Even worse, in broad daylight, he remained in the room, holding a sword. Looking out the window, he tried to calm down because his head was still attached to his body. Contemplating the scenery, he wondered if it was all just a dream. Whether it was or not, it was wise to call his guards just in case. Preparing to open the door, he hoped Dallin was still alive. A loud noise erupted behind him. He turned, ready to defend himself. However, he felt ill and collapsed. Downstairs, Dallin said he needed to better control his strength now. Returning, he told the owner of the emporium that he had completed his task, but found him unconscious. He thought he might have been poisoned, but again, the man didn't know why his mouth was foaming. In the room, someone entered, wondering what all the noise was about. The person who entered was Sienna, and to her, it made sense that the noise was caused by Dallin. Even so, he wanted to know what she was doing there. She brought the information he had asked for. The 3 of them sat in the room drinking tea while they talked. The man wanted to know if she was the informant from the Raven's Nest. She confirmed that she was. He couldn't believe she had an infiltrator in the emporium, but if that weren't the case, she wouldn't have known where Dallin was. Looking at him, she spoke again, saying she had the information he requested. She discovered which organization those silver masks belonged to. Since she had obtained it from the sewer incident, he hadn't thought she'd have enough time, but the girl had proven more capable than he expected. The question was whether she had done it right, so he asked who they were. They were heretics serving an evil god and called themselves Apostles of Regression. Additionally, there was one more thing. That book was the ledger from Telia's shop. Upon inspecting the book, he discovered a few more things. The owner of Telia's shop was one of the executives of the Apostles of Regression. In recent days, they had been buying large quantities of medicines, metals, and weapons. All these goods were stored in a warehouse they had purchased a long time ago and had neglected. Dallin knew the place and hadn't expected them to have been there all this time. There were signs of the masked men there, as well as the people they had kidnapped, along with their henchmen. It seemed they intended to turn the hired thugs into semi-monsters and use the artisans to make weapons. This was the prelude to a war that would soon take place. He wanted to know if there were any updates on the Bronze Guards, since she was close to the commander of the Silent Company. She had spoken with him, and it seemed he would cooperate, but it would be difficult to attack the place without concrete evidence, and it was also outside his jurisdiction. However, for Dallin, that wasn't a problem. They just needed to create a justification for the guards to intervene. After the conversation ended, night fell over the city. A man complained about the cold, saying the winter was harsh. They could have sent the henchmen for that task, not the faithful followers of the cult. Even so, they were there standing guard at that building. His companion told him to stay quiet because if a golden mask heard that, he would be killed. The apostles have been working hard, and the grand plan will soon be put into action. Without warning, his companion fell to the ground. He had no idea what was going wrong, and Dallin was already behind him, much to his misfortune. Standing before the young man, Dallin wanted to know more about those white and gold masks. After all, he had killed them all. Hearing this, the young man was incredulous. Without waiting for his reaction, Dallin struck him. Thus, there would be no resistance from those 2. Besides them, there were a total of 30 people there. Many were on the rooftops and in the alleys of that place, but most of them were already unconscious, so there was no one left to stop his attack now. He jumped from the roof and headed for the ground. His descent was perfect and silent. There were no addicts or beggars on the street at this hour of the night. It's possible they had been captured and monstrified. Since they accelerated the plan, they no longer feared staying in the shadows. In the morning, he received confirmation that the Bronze Guards would assist them in this matter. The plan was simple: invade the building, deal with the enemies, and start a fire. Once the fire began, the guards, who would coincidentally be nearby, would help extinguish it. With that, they would gain access to heretical evidence. In theory, it was a perfect plan. Only one thing bothered him at the moment. The building had 5 floors in total, and the owner of the tile shop must be inside. If an invasion occurred, he didn't know if that person would flee or stay in the place. Regardless of what happened, Dallin was prepared for what might come. After all, whenever possible, he had to step on them. He took a moment to catch his breath. The worst outcome of the plan would be losing the shop's intel. To avoid that, he would choose another method. With that, he began to move. Dallin ran with the speed of an Olympic sprinter who never took a doping test. His steps were powerful and firm. He prepared to jump using his newly acquired ability. Without apparent difficulty, he was almost at the top floor. In midair, he chose a spot to gain access to the building. His hand prepared a punch to make an entrance. The window shattered, and he was inside the building now. It had been some time since the last time. There were cells in the place, but no one was guarding them. This prison held captive the half-monsters. They tried to break free through the bars of their cells, but without success. Seeing all of this brought back unpleasant memories. A man said Dallin was making too much noise and that he and his apostles had witnessed the presence of God. However, it was the first time he doubted what his eyes were seeing. He wanted to know if Dallin had cast a spell. This was Achilles, the owner of the shop. Dallin said he didn't know much about spells, but as a rich man, Achilles could go to the doctor to get his eyes checked. The battle between